She was 90 years old. Her hair was always in place. Her makeup was always to a T. Her dress was always beautiful. Her husband of 70 years had just passed away, and her declining health had caused her to have to go to a nursing home to stay the rest of her days. Her neighbor, because there was no family, her neighbor took her to the nursing home, stayed with her out in the lobby for quite a while until finally someone came from the nursing home. And as they were talking to her, they said, "Do you want to see your room?" She said, "Oh, yes." "Well, I believe you'll like your room," the attendant said. The lady said, "No, I love it." And she said, "Well, how can you love it? You haven't even seen it yet." She said, "It doesn't matter what the room looks like. It doesn't matter the arrangement of the room. What matters is inside me, and I choose to love it no matter what." In Psalm 118, verse 24, the psalmist says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. We rejoice and be glad in it." It's a great thought, isn't it? Each day when we get up, we get to decide what kind of day we're going to have. We get to pick our attitude. We get to pick how we look at the day. We can look at it from the standpoint of all the world is bad and all the world is going to hell in a handbasket, as the old saying goes. That nothing's good, everything's rotten. We can choose to look at a day and say, "This is the day that the Lord's made. I'm going to rejoice. I'm going to be glad in it." I choose my attitude. I choose my disposition. I choose the way I look at things. And so we really need to learn to look at things from a positive standpoint. We need to look not for the bad, but for the good. We need to look not to see how things terrible they are, but how good they can be. You know, when you think about, we often look at Matthew 7 and we say, "Oh, that's that great passage in the Sermon on the Mount, beginning in verse 1, judge not to be, don't be judged for with what you judge. It should be judged with what measure we should be measured to." And how it talks about how that we consider the speck in our brother's eye when we have a plank in our own eye. And how in the world can we do that? But in those verses, Jesus is saying, choose your attitude wisely. Look for the good. Find the good. Let all bitterness, Paul said it this way in Ephesians 4, verse 31, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be what? Be put away. Don't let it be a part of your life. Let all bitterness, the seed of bitterness, the root of bitterness, let it be put away from you. Don't let it be part of your life. But not only just look at the good, but be positive. You know, that passage that we sometimes quote and know very well, Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, where Paul says, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, there be any virtue, there be any praise, think on these things. We have to learn to be positive, not just look at things and say, let's look for the positive, but let's be positive. Well, that's why Paul would say in Romans chapter 12 and verse 31, be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Learn to be positive. You see, it's easy to be negative. It's easy to not only look for the bad, but it's also easy to be negative. Why? Because we live in a negative world. We live in a world that says, look at everything from the standpoint of it's all terrible. We turn on the nightly news. The majority of it's what? It's bad news. Because not only do we have the news that tells about the killings and the stealings and so forth, but we get to the weather and guess what they're pointing out? Oh, if today's beautiful, it doesn't matter. Tuesday's going to be a weather alert day. That's what they tell us. See, it's all bad news. So we learn to be negative. And yet God says, be positive. When you think about Paul, and you think about that passage in Philippians chapter 4, where Paul said, I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. If you look at Paul when he said that, think about a couple of things that had gone on in his life. By the time he wrote that, from what we can tell, he had probably had a thorn in the flesh, whatever that was. We do not know. But whatever that thorn in the flesh was, he probably had it at least 11 years when he wrote Philippians 4. He'd been in Roman jail for over 2 years. He'd been chained to a Roman guard, and they changed the guard every day. He never saw the same person twice. And yet, he was able to say, whatever state I am, I've learned to be happy. How did he do that? I think it's because he chose a positive attitude. He had a peace that passes all understanding. That was part of his heart and his mind and his life. And so he chose to be happy. He chose to be joyful. He chose to, this is the day that the Lord has made. I'll rejoice and be glad. That's our message this evening. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, I'll sing. You can respond while together we stand and sing.